Okay, today we are going to discuss nonverbal communication. And the first thing that I want to mention here is that when it comes to nonverbal communication, this is an extremely important yet overlooked subject with regard to the way in which one presents him or herself. Now, this is some pushback I always get from students in class. They say things like, it's very unfair. I'm, young and idealistic, and it's unfair that someone would judge me based on my nonverbal behavior as opposed to my intellectual abilities, right? Or my verbal behavior, or the way that I can reason an argument. And I think this is all legitimate concerns. However, the one factor I always throw towards them is the idea that you are concerned that people might judge you based on your nonverbal behavior, yet you yourself also judge other people based on their nonverbal behavior. Right? You judge people based on the way that they dress, the way they present themselves, how well they can carry a conversation, their tone, their energy. So you engage in it too. So we can have this sort of tension with regard to whether or not it's conscious or unconscious, with regard to why it is that humans do judge people a lot based on nonverbal behavior. But the fact of the matter is that we all do it. And therefore, it's something that you should be conscious of, because if you want to be successful, there's ways in which you can just make slight modifications to your nonverbal behavior in order to sort of boost yourself sort of, in a job talk. All right. So these are some things we're going to talk about today with regard to nonverbal communication. And my hope is that you get a few, little tips you can think about as you're going out there and looking for internships and jobs in the upcoming years. So we're always communicating, even if we're not speaking. If you've taken my class before, you've seen this model of communication, which is referred to as the transactional model of communication, which is different than just the linear model of communication. In the old linear model of communication, there was a sender who sent a message to the receiver. That was the end of it. As people continue to develop this model, they realize that it's not just the sender and receiver, but there's also all this, outside noise and context, field of experience, they call it here, feedback channel. The receiver, even if you're a student in my class and you're sitting quietly the whole semester, you are sending me nonverbal cues, and I am receiving those cues. So if your eyes are glazed over, if you're falling asleep, if you're on your phone, those things are sending me messages with regard to how engaged you are in the class or how attentive you are as a student, right? So communication is extremely messy in this regard. One thing that we should sort of recognize is that the message, right, if we're talking about this model of communication, for the sake of argument, we're going to say the message stays the same. The message is the same, but the channels can change, right? So we can be face-to-face, we can be over Zoom or a YouTube lecture like we are now. I could text you this lesson, I could send you an email. So the channel might say, but the message is the same. I need to get you information on nonverbal communication, right? The context could change. So right now it's a teacher-student relationship. It could be a peer-to-peer relationship. It could be a parent-child relationship. So all of these things change the way in which the message is communicated, but the message remains the same. All right. So just kind of recognize that all of these contextual elements go into how a person receives a message. We do have what's called truth bias, so we tend to lean towards the idea that people are telling the truth when they communicate with us. And the reason we do this is because we can't go around our entire life being paranoid that everyone's always lying to us. So there is this sort of built-in mechanism for individuals to say, like, the only way that I can operate and move through the world is to assume that the majority of people who I come in contact with are telling me the truth. So if I go to the post office because I'm looking for a letter that I got lost in the mail, I'm assuming that they're telling me factual information with regard to where it is, as opposed to lying to me. That they lost it, or some FBI agent came in and took my mail, or somebody stole it. My assumption is that they're telling me the truth with regard to where the package is in the mail. I have no idea where the package is, but I have to assume that the people who are in charge of the package know where the package is. All right. We do this when we go out to eat, when we engage in any sort of retail situation. We assume that the people who are giving us information about the food we're eating and the products we're buying are giving us truthful information with regard to how much it costs, excuse me, how much it costs, where it's made, the materials that it's made from. If you're an environmentally conscious person, you might, you trust labels with regard to eco-friendly kind of stuff, right? So we move through the world assuming that most people are telling us, or that people are telling us the truth all the time, right? And the thing is that most people do tell the truth most of the time. And I sort of add this caveat and I say, at least things that are towards the truth, right? Now they might omit some things, they might exaggerate a little bit, but most of the time when we communicate with people, they're telling us things that are leaning towards what is truthfully accurate about the situation. There are obviously times when we do exaggerate, or we might, tell a little white lie with regard to, why we're 10 minutes late, depending on the severity of the situation, but we lean towards telling other individuals the truth. When it comes to sort of the pervasive lies in society, about, we have what are called prolific liars. One of the stats out of the textbook, which I'm not sure if this is an accurate stat or if they were sort of exaggerating statistics to make a point. But this idea that, 5% of people tell 50% of the lies. There are people out there who just, lie constantly. All right. So a couple things that you can look at, right? So you think of like, why do people lie and how do you spot a liar? Obviously, people lie to protect themselves or reputation, to protect the feelings of the other person involved, maybe because they don't want to see as incapable of performing the task, so they lie about their ability to do the task, right, at hand. Now, here's an interesting question with regard to nonverbal communication. All right, how do you spot a liar? Now, we're in the sort of presidential season. We're about a week away from, actually, we're only like 4 days away from the election, pretty close to the election. And during all the debates, and usually when we're on the presidential candidates are on the campaign trails, there's a lot of quote unquote nonverbal experts who get on the news and talk about a candidate looked a certain way, or here's a candidate's handshake, and I'm going to overanalyze, a presidential candidate's outfit to sort of try to find all these subtle hidden messages as to whether or not that president is telling the truth or not telling the truth with regard to whatever topics at hand. Here's the thing about spotting a liar. You can't spot a liar based on engaging with that person one time and assuming all these traits. If a person looks up and to the left, they're always lying. It's not true, all right? That's a lie. The way you spot a liar is you have to have a baseline for how that person acts when they're engaged in truth telling. So, if someone says, if someone doesn't make eye contact, they must be lying. It's not necessarily true, right? If you are engaged with an individual and that person never makes eye contact because they are a very shy person, right? But they're always not making eye contact. And then you engage with them and you're trying to figure out if they're telling the truth about a situation and they're not making eye contact. You're like, well, that's normal behavior. That's how that person always acts. If that person's constantly looking at, his or her feet, right? It's like, well, if they're doing that, then, when you're trying to figure out if they're lying or not, you can't say that behavior is somehow indicative of them lying if they are constantly doing that behavior anyway, all right? The way you spot a liar is you have to have a good understanding of what that person's baseline nonverbal behavior is. So do they talk with their hands a lot? Do they make eye contact? Do they not make eye contact? Are they very still and standoffish? Is their voice usually low? Is their voice really high, right? Do they play with their hands, right? Do they touch their face? Everybody has all these little quirks with regard to just normal nonverbal behavior, but it's unique to the person. When you are engaging with a person in it and they start acting differently, then you know that something is probably, something's up, something's not right? Now, it doesn't mean that they're telling a lie. Maybe they've gone through a stressful situation, but you can start to tell when someone's not acting right. But if the person's always acting in this exaggerated, quirky fashion, that doesn't mean that anything's wrong. It just means that, that's how the person is always normally acting, all right? Now, here's some fun little questions for you to think about. All right? Why do you lie, and what are some standards that you have for when it's okay to lie? So there's this sort of paradoxical cognitive dissonance we all have when we say, I want to move through the world and assume that everyone is always going to tell me the truth. But we also know that there are times and instances when we don't tell the truth. right? So we are very hypocritical in this regard when it comes to all human behavior. Um, so you have to sort of think like, yeah, there are times in which I do lie, and you say, okay, why is it that I'm lying, right? Do I want to be known as a liar? And if I have standards that other people should always tell me the truth, why is it that I allow myself to lie and not hold myself up to the values that I'm placing on everyone else, right? So uphold your own standards and values, and then if other people are also upholding those standards and values, then fine. And if they're not, then you can have a discussion about the relationship. But if you're a person who's exaggerating and lying and hiding stuff in your own, let's say your friendship, and then you find out that your friend is also doing the same thing, it's very hypocritical for you to get upset about it. Now, again, we all do, maybe not flat out lie, but we get into these ideas of omissions and exaggeration. So you have to think like, okay, what are my standards for when it's okay, right? If it protects someone's feelings, like what are your standards? If it's going to save somebody's life, right? If it's going to save somebody's job, it's like, okay, maybe that's it. But those are pretty high standards to meet. And most of us aren't facing these sort of life or death situations on a daily with regard to telling the truth, nor are we facing, getting fired types of situations on the daily. So you got to figure out, okay, take note of like when's the last few times that you've told a lie, and then figure out, are those do those align with my values? And if they don't align with my values, you have to have some serious conversations with yourself with regard to what standards should I hold myself to, because I am, again, holding other people to these types of standards with regard to I expect people to engage with me in a truthful way. So, I sort of need to, follow my own advice in this regard. Um, with nonverbal communication, we get into this idea of logical versus emotional reactions. So you can read this little meme over here with Batman. My boss told me to dress for the job you want, not the job you have. So I'm sitting in a disciplinary meeting dressed as Batman. All right. Here's the thing, right? We should all strive to pay attention to the logical arguments that people are making, right? However, we are visual people. We are individuals who like the characteristics, the warmth, the energy of people. So we're attracted to people who are charismatic. This is why every 4 to 8 years we are switching who the presidential party or who the party is as far as who's winning the presidency. That's just, we lean towards charismatic people, and we don't always focus on like what presidential candidate has the best policy. So again, you want to be appreciated for your intellectual abilities to make a logical argument, and you wish that people wouldn't judge you. Students say like, why do I have to dress up for a speech, right? Like it shouldn't matter what clothes I wear. It's a good argument either way. And I say that's true, but I also know that you are judging your professors based on how your professors show up in the classroom, whether or not they're professional. You are judging your classmates with regard to how they hold themselves up, whether or not they're dressed professionally, whether or not they're carrying themselves well, whether or not they're making eye contact, right? So since you're making those judgments about people, you're making nonverbal judgments about people, sort of turn the mirror back on yourself and recognize like, okay, what are some ways in which I can make it so that I gain more credibility with my audience with regard to how I carry myself nonverbally, okay? So even though we wish we lived in a world that was all logic-based, we know that we are very emotionally driven animals who are attracted to charismatic, energetic individuals who sort of really uphold themselves. We can think about this with the presidential candidates, right? So if we go back to 2008, then Senator Obama and Senator McCain were in the race. Senator McCain was an older individual who did not have as much what people called the cool factor of President Obama. He was older, he had less energy, he wasn't this sort of young, very cool guy who hung out with Jay-Z and Beyonce out of Chicago. Like Obama's just a very charismatic person, right? You fast forward, Obama's reelected, and 2016 comes along, and you have this presidential race between Hillary Clinton, who was not out there shaking hands and kissing babies. Was very sort of protected in this bubble that she had made for herself over the past 25 plus years that she had been in Washington, D.C. And you can say, well, that's, not for, you can get into like why that had to be, right? It's like she was first lady and then she was a senator. She's a high ranking government official. It's like, of course, she needs to be surrounded by a lot of people, whether it's like security detail and everything else. But then you have someone like Donald Trump who's just going out there and running his own show and, like or dislike what comes out of his mouth. At least at some point, people felt like, okay, this seems like a this seems like a more normal and regular conversation I would have with my uncle at Thanksgiving, as opposed to somebody who seems a little bit too buttoned up, like Hillary Clinton was in 2016. So again, we don't always go for what's the best logical argument. Sometimes we just say like emotionally, who am I connecting with? And we can sort of see this back and forth with presidential candidates. All right. Demeanor is just a fancy word for how a person presents him or herself. All right. Which we're going to talk a little bit more in the next. So there's these interesting experiments that have happened. They've happened multiple times. You can look some up. Newspapers have covered them over the years because it is pretty interesting, these results, right? So you have to think about, what job do you want, and then how should you dress for that job? A thing I used to do in my classes when we were in person is I'd have you write down what that job is and what your daily wardrobe would look like, and then draw yourself a little picture of how you would dress, right? Now this goes back to why it is that I ask students to make sure that they carry themselves well non-verbally. All right. When you go out in the job market, you're going to be 22 years old with no experience, and you're going to have a college degree like lots of other people have college degrees. Don't give anyone a reason to dismiss your intelligence or qualifications because you couldn't be bothered to wake up 15 minutes early to take a shower and put on a nice, business suit, right? Or whatever would be appropriate for the job. All right. People are going to find plenty of reasons to dismiss a 22, 23-year-old freshly minted college graduate with no experience. All right. So don't give them a reason to look you over and then start dismissing you for all these other issues that you can take care of in 5 minutes. Right. It's like take a shower, look good, smell good, put on a nice outfit. Show up a couple minutes early, right? Like that plays into nonverbal communication. Like, hey, I'm here a couple minutes early because I actually, care about, being on time, kind of stuff, right? Then, there's a little fun question is like, why aren't you dressing like this every day? Okay. So I used to have students as homework, show up to class one day, dressed for the job that they want. All right. So some of the quick research on this. And again, there's multiple ways in which this study has been done with school-age children, people in the workplace. But I think the most recognized study was done in a medical school. So what they had is first-year med school students would show up on the very first day of classes, and what they would do is they would take half the class and they would put them in sort of the white lab coats for the first semester, and the other students would just come to class normally. All right. So this half of the class, your daily outfit is like wear whatever you want, but at the beginning of every day, you're also going to get a white lab coat to walk around and learn how to be a doctor. Everyone else, you just come to class however you want to dress, and you're good to go. And what they found is at the end of the semester, the students who would show up to class every day and then put on a white lab coat, so it's like you're kind of already feeling like you're a doctor, they performed better on average on their final exams. All right. Similar things were done with elementary school students as far as like putting on lab coats or maybe like putting on the outfit of like a scientist in like a physics or a chemistry classroom, right? And they would start to see that those students started to take the work a little bit more serious. They saw that their grades would improve a little bit, right? So there is this mentality that goes into like when you wake up a little bit early and put on a fresh set of clothes to, for the job that you want, you actually sort of start to, it's that fake it till you make it. It's like I'm putting on this wardrobe of the job that I want, and then that sends me a subconscious message every day. It's like, oh, I can be a doctor. Oh, I can be a lawyer. Oh, I can be a teacher, right? A professor. You know, so whatever job it is you want, like think about, what's the best outfit for me to put on so I feel like I need to take myself seriously today, right? You roll out of bed and you're wearing the pajamas, right, for your work day that you wore to bed last night. You're not gonna feel like you have to take the job as serious. But if something happens that when we put on an outfit, we transform a little bit because we know that we're playing a different role. All right. So if you ever need to boost your confidence, this is a piece of advice I give to students. If they ever have a phone interview, dress up as if you are about to see that person face to face. All right. Even though you're over the phone, you're the only person who knows, like you're wearing like a suit and tie or whatever. But there's something that happens where you feel like, okay, I'm professional right now, and I'm on the phone trying to be professional. Small little changes happen in your communication style. The final aspect we're going to talk about, we have two more slides here, but just this idea of we do some exercises in class about standing up straight and why it's important. Here's a little video that I'll put the link down below, but it's just like one of those like guys do yoga videos for people who aren't flexible. So I've done this a few times. But we talk about outside your clothing. Another good way to show people that you're serious is to sort of practice your nonverbal skills, right? So things that most people do is they stand up, but then they usually lean to one side or another, shifting their weight, from one leg to the next. It takes a little bit of practice to evenly distribute your weight shoulder width apart. And I know that this sounds so elementary, but it's something that you do need to practice and need to be mindful of. Something else, another little a fun thing I would have my students do is we'd walk around campus and we would try to see how many people were on their cell phones, like looking down at their feet. And everyone's like, yeah, everybody is, right? So imagine like walking around campus or walking around your place of employment where you're the one person who is sort of like looking at everybody eye level, as opposed to being the person where everybody just sees the top of your head because you're looking at your feet, right? If you start to shift these little things about your nonverbal behavior as far as how you carry yourself, it sends this interesting message to potential employers as well as your teachers, as well as your friends. But it's things that we need to practice. Right? If we're walking or if we're sitting all day or if we're walking around all day with our head down and our phone on, that becomes habitual as far as muscle memory. So I know it's elementary. It's like, I'm going to stand up straight and make eye contact and have a firm handshake. I think it's things that we could all rattle off if we need to, but unless we actually practice them, unless we actually practice both of my feet under my shoulders, holding the same amount of weight evenly as opposed to constantly shifting back and forth like most people do, we need to practice that. All right. So an exercise that you can do with whoever it is you're quarantined with, right, is just practice, right? Practice handshakes, practice making eye contact, right? Introducing yourself, talk, give them a short 1 or 2 sentences. Hi, my name is, this is the job I want. I appreciate your company for these reasons. And again, it's small talk. It's like, of course I know my name. Of course I know my major. Of course I know the job I want. But if you don't practice it, you realize that when you go to a job fair, you start to ramble or you get lost or you trip over yourself because you're not really, you don't know, okay, what order do I want to go to? I'm nervous because I'm looking for a job right now. A lot of nervous things happen when you don't practice them, right? So you should be practicing handshakes if those are still allowed after coronavirus, right? You should practice making eye contact. You should practice both feet underneath both of your shoulders evenly distributed. You should practice walking around campus with your head up as opposed to always looking down at your phone. All right, so these are some things that, again, small little changes that employers will notice. And finally, when it comes to nonverbal communication, we want to think about appropriateness. So what this means is your nonverbal behavior should match the verbal communication in the situation. So, if you're in a somber situation, if you're at somebody's funeral, you just want to make sure that your nonverbal behavior is matching sort of what's going on around you. This can create which can create trust with regard to nonverbal communication. So this is a very, very cool thing that you can do if you want people to trust you. All right, match their nonverbal behavior. So again, another exercise that you can do with a friend. All right, if anybody's ever taken like psychology or counseling 101 is really what it is, right? You can go to therapy. The thing that they're going to teach you, like in like a 101 class, maybe not the first day, but probably maybe in the first week, is if you want somebody needs you for help, for a listening ear, and if you want to gain their trust because they're about to give you a lot of emotional baggage and they need, they're going to tell you a lot of secrets and things they might be embarrassed about, the best thing that you can do non-verbally is to mirror their behavior. All right. So if someone comes into your office or a friend comes to you and they need, like, I have a secret I need to tell you, and they're leaning back a lot, right? And their arms are crossed, right? Sort of a defensive position. It would be a bad idea for you to lean in, right, and get way up in their face and say, like, tell me your secrets, right? That's what you're communicating, right? So if they're leaning back a little bit, you go ahead and sit down across from them and you lean back a little bit. If they're not making eye contact with you, don't stare at them in the eyes, all right? Now, there's going to be a moment at some point when they start to get a little bit more relaxed and they kind of lean in a little bit. And if they lean in, you don't want to lean back because now it looks like you're disinterested. If they lean in a little bit, you lean in a little bit, and now we have this sort of little moment of intimacy where we can feel like we can share secrets. If they're making eye contact with you, you should make eye contact back to let them know that you're attentive. All right? So mirroring other people's behaviors and actions helps them gain trust. If you're an older person, right, or if you're a bigger person, think of like adult child, right? But if you're like just like a bigger person as an adult, like you're 6'7", right? If you need to gain trust and let people know that even though you're bigger than they are, so an adult and a child, if you need to gain their trust because they might be scared of how big you are, right? One thing, like the first thing you can do is like get down on a knee and get like eye level with a kid, right? You don't want to be like, over top of someone. That makes them feel, especially if they're vulnerable, right? That makes them feel uncomfortable. So yeah, if there's a kid who's a little bit, scared of you, maybe you're meeting a niece or a nephew for the first time in a couple of years, right? And they're like 3 or 4 years old, they don't know who you are. It's like, get down on a knee, get eye level with them. And that's a way to gain people's trust. So matching other people's nonverbal communication when that other person is in a vulnerable situation and they're looking for your help, one way to be very helpful is to let them set the pace, and then you just constantly sort of mirror their behavior. If they're leaning in, leaning back, if their arms are crossed, making eye contact or not, if you need to kind of get down on their level if you're a bigger person. All right? Okay. You can read through these as far as, the ways in which we can study different stuff. The one I'll focus in on here is just proxemics, so the study of space. So just think about like what are appropriate distances as far as intimate relationships, like friendships, like how close are you allowed to be to somebody, how, whether or not you're allowed to touch them. First, like a classroom setting where it's like, put a few feet in between everybody, to more public spaces. But then you get into like public spaces and you're like, and again, this is all, non-corona situations. Public spaces, like I don't want a stranger closer to me than a few feet anyways. But then you're like, okay, New York City subway during rush hour, it's sort of anticipated that there's going to be a lot of strangers who are a little bit closer to you. So just like the study of space and when it's appropriate to be within certain distances of individuals. Okay, that's all I have for nonverbal communication. Again, dress for the job you want. Practice nonverbal cues when it comes to job interview stuff. Like you're going to have to make eye contact. You're going to have to shake hands with people. You're going to have to stand up straight, right? Don't be swinging back and forth looking, uncomfortable. And if you want to gain people's trust, let them take the lead and sort of, quietly match their nonverbal behaviors, okay? Those are the big things out of today's lesson, and we'll be back next time.